There are no screams at first. Only silence. A silence so heavy it feels alive, pressing against the lungs of every man, woman, and child on the planet. The wind stops. Machines die. Vox signals vanish into static. Deep beneath the soil, something ancient begins to stir, a pulse, cold and metallic, echoing through forgotten catacombs. For millennia they have slept, dreaming in the dark, their tombs undisturbed, their hatred eternal. And now, they awaken. The ground splits open as monolithic structures rise from the earth, green light spilling like blood across the night sky. Statues move. Dust becomes fleshless soldiers of living metal. The people of this world do not yet understand what they've unearthed, but soon they will. The stars will burn cold above them, and the Necrons will reclaim what was once theirs. One scream at a time. It began with silence, not the gentle kind that settles over a sleeping world, but a silence that killed. It came without warning, swallowing the familiar hum of civilization in a single breathless instant. The air itself seemed to die, as if the very molecules had forgotten how to move. No wind stirred the dust across the streets. No engines rumbled in the distance. Even the great hive cities, whose towers usually trembled under the noise of billions, became mausoleums of stillness. The Vox networks crackled once and then went dead. Within moments, every signal vanished, every broadcast ceased, and all that remained was the sound of nothing, vast, cold, and heavy. People came out into the streets, confused, whispering to each other as if afraid their voices might shatter whatever unseen force had fallen upon them. It was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of something waiting. At first, they tried to explain it. Tech priests spoke of solar storms, of magnetic interference, of data corruption. But their words meant nothing when the machines they used to speak them flickered and died in their hands. The Mechanicus shrines went dark, their sacred cogitators freezing mid-prayer. Manufactorums shut down one after another, pistons halting mid-stroke, servitors collapsing as their augmetics lost power. Even the air filtration systems inside the hive ceased to function, leaving entire sectors choking on stale breath. People panicked. They lit candles and recited the litanies of the Omnissiah, praying for the return of the machine spirits. But the spirits did not answer. Not even the distant glow of orbital relays or ship engines pierced the atmosphere anymore. The skies themselves seemed to dim, as though the Emperor's light had turned away. And beneath that growing dread, a question began to spread, not spoken aloud, but whispered in trembling hearts. What could silence a whole world? Then came the tremors. Subtle at first, like the sigh of a sleeping giant turning in its grave. The ground beneath manufactorums and mining outposts began to shift. Dust falling from ceilings, cracks appearing in the stone. Seismic sensors would have detected it, but none were working anymore. The silence was broken now, but not by life, by sound from below. Miners reported hearing strange echoes in the tunnels, like distant chimes or mechanical breathing. Some said they saw a green light pulsing deep in the rock, faint and rhythmic, like the beat of a heart. The planetary governor dismissed the reports as hysteria. But within days, the outpost stopped reporting entirely. When rescue teams were sent, they found only empty tunnels, equipment left running, meals half-eaten, and walls etched with strange, glowing patterns that seemed to shift when unobserved. And somewhere far below, in catacombs that had not seen light for 60 million years, the pulse continued, growing stronger. The silence had changed. It was no longer empty, it was listening. Those who walked through the abandoned streets began to hear faint murmurs, like voices carried on the edge of thought. Sometimes they were prayers. Sometimes they were screams. Entire sectors fell into madness as people began to vanish, snatched away by unseen things in the dark. The Imperial Guard deployed to restore order, but their auspexes failed, their tanks stalled, and their weapons refused to fire. Vox operators reported strange binary whispers on every frequency, not random static, but a language none could understand. A few claimed to see figures in the fog, tall, metallic, and unmoving, like statues half buried in the ground. When the fog lifted, the statues were gone. By the seventh day, the planetary capital was filled with refugees, all muttering the same thing. The dead beneath the world are waking. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the tremors stopped. The whispers ceased. The world seemed to hold its breath. People dared to hope that maybe the storm had passed, that the Emperor had shielded them after all. But that hope died when the ground split open, and emerald light spilled across the night like liquid fire. Towers of black metal rose from the earth, their surfaces humming with ancient energy. The air filled with a low mechanical chant that vibrated through every bone and circuit. Those who looked upon the monoliths felt their minds unravel, visions of endless tombs, galaxies conquered, and a race that had never truly died. The silence returned once more, absolute and final, broken only by the sound of marching. Countless metal feet rising from the dust. The Necrons had awakened. And for the first time, humanity understood what true silence meant, the silence of extinction. It started slowly, a whisper of malfunction that spread like a disease. Servitors froze mid-task, their eyes flickering as the hum of their internal engines stuttered and died. Cogitators began to print endless strings of corrupted data, symbols, that no one recognized, repeating endlessly across their screens. The tech priests of Mars, wrapped in red robes and faith, recited the litanies of maintenance until their voices cracked, but the machine spirits did not answer. Even the most sacred relic engines, anointed daily with sacred oils, sputtered and fell silent. The world's heart, once mechanical, ordered, efficient, began to slow. Conveyor belts halted, manufacturing chimneys stopped breathing smoke, and for the first time in generations, the hives went quiet enough to hear human voices echo through their empty halls. The people felt it before they understood it, the sense that something ancient and invisible was feeding on the world's pulse. In the upper spires, the nobles panicked. Their private servitors failed to deliver messages, their power lines flickered, and their protective field generators sparked out. Across the planet, holy relays of the Adeptus Mechanicus began to burn with green light, not the red of human industry, but something colder, wrong, and utterly alien. Tech priests opened the panels of their machinery only to find the circuits melted, reshaped into unfamiliar patterns, as if the devices themselves had begun to dream of something else. Those who stared too long at the strange inscriptions began to murmur in binary, their human thoughts overwritten by whispers that were not of the Omnissiah. They were taken away for purification, but no fire could purge the infection. The machines had begun to think, and they no longer recognized their masters. In the lower hives, panic turned to chaos. Elevators froze between levels, trapping hundreds in darkness. Lights flickered and died, leaving only the faint green glow of malfunctioning lumen strips. Vox communications were useless. Every attempt to contact other sectors ended in silence or strange rhythmic pulses that made listeners bleed from the ears. Children cried as the water pumps stopped working, as though the planet itself had decided to suffocate them. The priests claimed it was divine punishment, but their hymns were drowned beneath the grinding moan of rusted metal. Some began to speak of ghosts in the machines, shadows moving through the wires, faces glimpsed in dead screens. Those who believed in such things began to pray louder. Those who didn't began to scream. Deep below, in the forgotten industrial tunnels, the Mechanicus deployed a team of Engen seers to locate the source of the corruption. They followed the lines of dead machinery down into the earth, past the last functioning generators, into chambers that had not been opened for centuries. There they found the heart of the infection, a vast mechanical sphere buried in the rock, covered in glyphs that pulsed with faint green light. Its surface moved like liquid metal, whispering in binary that no man had ever heard. The engine seers tried to approach, but their automatics went mad, limbs twitching, eyes burning with static. One of them screamed as his mechanical arm fused into the ground, metal to metal, until his entire body was absorbed. The others fled, leaving their equipment behind, running blind through the tunnels as the sphere began to hum. Its light grew, brighter, deeper, until it filled the tunnels like blood in veins. By dawn, the planet's machinery was dead. The manufactorums stood frozen, their walls dripping with condensation, their engines still as tombs. Even the orbital stations had fallen silent, their lights extinguished one by one until the sky itself was empty. From orbit, the world looked peaceful. But below the surface, the pulse continued, stronger now, resonating through every circuit, every cog, every wire. The infection had become a voice, and the voice was calling to something older, something buried. The tech priests could not hear it anymore, but the machines could, and they obeyed. The first to see it were the miners, men and women used to the darkness, hardened by years of labor beneath the earth. They said it began as a faint shimmer, like moonlight seeping through stone. At first, no one believed them. The surface cities laughed off the reports, calling them madness born of exhaustion. But then the lights grew stronger. By the second night, whole valleys glowed faintly from beneath, as though the world's core itself had begun to burn with green fire. The light was cold, unnatural, casting long trembling shadows across the hives. People gathered at windows and on rooftops, staring down at the faint illumination spreading through the ground. It wasn't a reflection, nor any trick of the atmosphere. It was alive. The light moved like veins beneath skin, pulsing slowly, a rhythm that seemed almost like a heartbeat. Soon, every settlement near the equatorial wastes reported the same thing. Fields that had lain fallow for decades began to flicker faintly with emerald veins. The administratum ordered all citizens to remain indoors, claiming it was a geothermal event. But even they could not ignore the patterns forming in the light, geometric shapes, precise and deliberate, as if something vast and mechanical were drawing lines across the bedrock itself. Children cried when the light reached their hab blocks, the glow seeping up through the cracks in the floors. Livestock refused to eat, their eyes reflecting the green as they trembled in silence. Then, as night deepened, the light began to hum, a low metallic drone that could be felt through the bones more than heard. It spread through every structure, every wall, every heart, until people could no longer sleep. The tech priests of the Adeptus Mechanicus were dispatched to investigate. Wrapped in robes of red and steel, they descended into the mining shafts armed with auspex scanners and prayers. What they found defied all catechism. The walls of the tunnels were etched with alien sigils, glowing softly, changing shape when observed. The rock itself seemed to breathe. As they delved deeper, the green light intensified, coalescing into patterns that pulsed in unison with their footsteps, as if something below was aware of them. They recorded the phenomenon, but the data was useless. Every file corrupted, every reading erased by static that whispered in fragmented binary. When one of the tech priests touched the glowing rock, his mechanical limbs locked up, and his voice emitted a stream of alien code before he fell silent forever. The survivors fled, but the light followed them, spreading up the tunnels like rising water down above ground. Panic consumed the population. Some claimed to see figures moving within the glow, shadows of impossible geometry, things that flickered in and out of sight. Entire settlements near the mining zones were evacuated, or tried to be. The roads cracked apart as the ground beneath them shifted, releasing bursts of green luminescence that scorched the air. The planetary governor declared martial law, ordering orbital scans, but the ships above found only interference, their sensors blinded by the same emerald haze, now covering the planet's surface. Cities flickered like dying candles in the dark as the light below grew brighter. reaching up like grasping hands through the cracks of the world. It was no longer a mystery. It was a message. Something ancient was stirring, and it wanted to be seen. Then came the night of the surge. Every inch of soil, every stone, every structure vibrated with a deep, resonant tone that could shatter glass and minds alike. The light burst upward in colossal beams from beneath the earth, piercing clouds and burning away the stars. People fell to their knees as the sky turned green, their shadows stretching and twisting unnaturally. Across the horizon, the outlines of enormous structures became visible under the glow, vast tomb-like constructs buried for eons, now awakening. The hum became a roar, mechanical and cold, drowning every prayer, every scream. And when it finally subsided, the world was changed forever. The ground still pulsed faintly, breathing like a living thing. The lights did not fade. They waited, watching. The Necrons were not yet risen, but their eyes were open, and humanity had been seen. At first, it was only one mining outpost, a small isolated colony on the edge of the equatorial desert, home to a few hundred laborers and their overseers. The Vox contact ceased suddenly, mid-sentence, as the overseer reported strange tremors beneath the lower shafts. The last sound transmitted was a hollow rumble, followed by static that echoed for minutes before falling silent. No distress beacon, no emergency flare, nothing. The administratum dismissed it as an equipment failure, promising investigation once resources allowed. But when the second colony disappeared the next night, and then the third, people began to whisper that the Earth itself had turned against them. The silence that followed each disappearance was absolute. No wreckage, no smoke, no corpses. Only empty ground where once stood entire settlements of steel and fire. By the fourth night, panic gripped the planet. Families in nearby towns packed their belongings and fled toward the hive cities, their convoys choking the roads under the green-lit sky. But fear traveled faster than any transport. The miners' families spoke of nightmares, of voices calling from beneath the ground, metallic and cold, urging them to come home. The Imperial Guard was dispatched to the last known location of Outpost 17, their transports kicking up dust as they approached the silent site. From orbit, the Auspex readings showed the colony still intact. Yet when the soldiers arrived, they found nothing. No buildings, no machines, not even footprints. The land was smooth and undisturbed, as though it had never been touched by human hands. Even the earth smelled wrong, metallic, sterile, ancient. The commander ordered a full retreat, but by dawn, his entire regiment had vanished too. Those who remained in the hives could not sleep. The green glow beneath the surface had begun to spread beneath populated areas now, faint lines creeping up through the foundations. Workers refused to enter the lower hab levels, claiming to hear faint clanking noises echoing through the pipes, like the march of distant metal feet. The Mechanicus, desperate to explain the disappearances, suggested seismic subsidence, though their own instruments provided no data. In private, they argued in hushed binary tones, fearing something they dared not name. Explorator units sent deep underground returned mad, their minds filled with visions of endless halls and silent statues, and of an ancient voice whispering across eternity. The reports were sealed, their authors declared heretics or executed to preserve morale. But word always finds a way to spread. And what spread now was terror. The final disappearance came without warning. Mining complex Theta Primus, the largest on the planet, employing over 10,000 souls, ceased all communication during the third shift. The satellites above recorded a momentary pulse of green light, bright enough to overload sensors, and then darkness. When dawn came, a vast crater stretched across the landscape, smooth as glass. The site was gone, erased. Only fragments of melted steel remained at the edges, twisted into impossible shapes. Imperial investigators sent later found something beneath the crater, a black stone surface engraved with glyphs that emitted faint energy readings. When they tried to dig deeper, the ground refused to yield, as if the planet itself resisted intrusion. Hours later, their equipment failed, their data corrupted, and the team stopped responding. The last transmission, captured by a listening post in the upper atmosphere, contained a single phrase repeated in metallic monotone: "The sleepers have no mercy." In the days that followed, the planet changed. The green lights beneath the surface pulsed like a heartbeat, and strange structures began to rise from the deepest fissures, angular, alien, humming with power. The missing colonies had not simply vanished. They had been taken. The world trembled as ancient engines awoke, and from below came the faint echo of metallic footsteps in perfect unison. The Imperium would later call it a mass disappearance, a geological anomaly, an unexplainable loss. But the truth lay buried deeper in the cold catacombs where once human miners had toiled, now silent halls lined with skeletal machines. The Necrons had claimed their first world. And above, in the empty deserts, the wind blew softly over smooth glass plains that whispered of the dead. They found it by accident. The survivors of the Northern Hemisphere collapsed as engineers, scavengers, deserters, searching for shelter amid the endless wastelands. Beneath a dune of blackened sand, one of them struck metal. Not rusted, not corroded, perfectly smooth, humming faintly under the touch. They dug until their fingers bled, clearing away the dust to reveal a surface that seemed to go on forever, cold and flawless, untouched by time. It wasn't a wall. It wasn't a floor. It was something in between, like a boundary between worlds. When the first light from their lanterns fell across the engravings, they froze. The markings glowed with a pale green pulse, rhythmic and alive, forming symbols no human tongue could read. They weren't random. They were intentional. And deep beneath that metal skin, something began to stir. Word spread quickly. The Adeptus Mechanicus descended upon the site, their transports slicing through the dust storms like metal angels. They came with reverence, chanting Benharic prayers as they established perimeters and sanctified the ground. The Magos in charge, an old, half-machine scholar named Lixander, believed it to be an ancient Xeno relic, a pre-Imperial structure lost to time. But the deeper they drilled, the stranger it became. The walls repaired themselves. Their instruments malfunctioned when placed near the surface. Energy readings climbed higher than anything recorded on the planet before. And then, a door was found, an immense hexagonal gate that wasn't made but grown from the surrounding material, covered in circuitry that looked disturbingly organic. The Magos ordered it opened, despite the screams of his acolytes. And the door obeyed. The ground trembled as the massive structure unfolded like a blooming flower of black metal, exhaling a gust of stale, cold air that smelled of dust and death. Floodlights illuminated the entrance, a vast corridor stretching into darkness, lined with pillars carved into the shapes of skeletal warriors, their eyes filled with faint green fire. The Mechanicus team entered, dragging data cables and prayer scrolls behind them. Their words echoed endlessly in the metallic abyss. They found more than they could comprehend: miles of tunnels, each perfectly symmetrical, each alive with a subtle vibration that resonated with the human heartbeat. Deep inside, they discovered floating obelisks that rotated slowly, humming with invisible energy. One acolyte reached out to touch it. The obelisk responded with a flicker of light, and the acolyte collapsed, lifeless, his flesh turning to dust before the other's eyes. The obelisk pulsed once more and went still, as if tasting the air before going back to sleep. Lixander didn't stop. He was too fascinated, too far gone. He recorded everything, lifts, structures, readings, and sent data packets to orbit before the transmissions began to fail. His final log, recovered weeks later, contained a broken voice filled with awe and terror. They're not ruins. They're a system. This world isn't built upon them. They are the world. The ground is the machine. Moments later, the feed erupted into static, punctuated by the sound of countless metallic clicks echoing in the distance, like skeletal fingers tapping on stone. The Mechanicus forces never returned. When a recovery team arrived days later, the site was deserted. Their vehicles were still there. The tents, the cog banners, the instruments all untouched. But there were no bodies. Only the open doorway, breathing faint wisps of green fog into the cold air. At night, the structure began to glow. The sand around it fused into glass, and the dunes sank as if the planet itself were exhaling. Green light pulsed beneath the surface like veins under skin. From orbit, the pattern resembled circuitry, geometric, deliberate, alive. Something vast and ancient had been awakened, something that had been waiting for millions of years beneath the feet of man. The Imperium would send armies, fleets, inquisitors, but by then it would be too late. The ruins were no ruins at all. They were the bones of a tomb world beginning to rise, its slumber broken. And from the darkness below, mechanical voices whispered in unison, "The harvest begins." It began with the missing patrols. At first, the commanders believed it was the storms, radiation, dust, or the planet's erratic magnetic fields. But soon, fragments of armor began to appear in the wastes, still marked with Imperial insignia, some still warm to the touch. No bodies, no blood, just the gear of the vanished. Then one night, the sentries at Outpost Kappa 9 saw movement on the horizon. Silhouettes in the sandstorm, dozens of them, walking in perfect formation. The sentries hailed them, their voices lost in the wind. When the figures drew closer, the floodlights flickered, and every machine in the outpost died at once. Vox, power, auspex, all went silent. In that brief darkness, the soldiers saw what approached, their missing comrades, faces blank and gray, eyes glowing faintly green. Their skin was stretched thin over metal bones, their movements precise, unnatural, synchronized. And they did not stop walking. The first volley of fire did nothing. The returning dead advanced without sound or pain, their steps deliberate, their forms shimmering faintly with a metallic sheen. When they finally reached the perimeter, the air grew colder. The commander ordered a retreat, but by then it was too late. The fallen began to rise. Corpses that had been buried hours or days before clawed their way up through the sand, their veins glowing with the same emerald light. Weapons jammed. Vox units screamed static. The night became a blur of muzzle flashes and screams swallowed by the storm. When dawn came, the outpost was gone, its walls torn down, its gates half melted. Only footprints remained, hundreds of them, all leading back toward the metallic ruins. In the days that followed, more of the dead returned. From mass graves, from the battlefields, from the mining shafts, they rose in silence, their humanity erased. The priests called them the soulless, believing it a curse, a punishment for trespassing upon holy ground. But the truth was colder. The Necrons were reclaiming what was once theirs, the matter, the essence, the flesh that had dared to occupy their tomb world. The transformation wasn't possession. It was assimilation. The bodies were being rebuilt, reshaped, repurposed. Entire settlements vanished overnight, and the next day, figures walked out of the dunes wearing their faces, only hollow now, precise, machine-like. Even children returned, their laughter replaced by the hum of circuitry beneath their skin. Survivors fled to the hive cities, sealing the gates, praying to the Emperor for deliverance. The Mechanicus tried to understand, dissect, reason, but every specimen they captured crumbled into dust the moment they were examined, as if refusing to be studied by mortal hands. The Inquisition arrived next, branding the planet under immediate quarantine. They found the world already half consumed, the soil metallic, the rivers glowing faintly green beneath the surface. Those who still lived spoke of voices in their dreams, calling them to the ruins. Some obeyed. None returned. In the night sky, Faint green lines began to trace themselves across the continents, pulsing like a heartbeat. The dead no longer needed to rise. The living were walking willingly into the machine's embrace. When the final transmission left the planet, it was nothing but whispers and static. But buried within the noise, a fragment of a voice was heard, distant, mechanical, calm. It spoke in ancient words, translated later by the Inquisition's archives. The flesh forgets. The metal remembers. The transmission ended with a sound rhythmic, endless, the march of countless metal feet echoing through the void. And in that sound was the truth the Imperium would never admit. Death had not come to that world. It had simply changed form. It began with a sound, low, distant, and deep enough to rattle the bones of the world. At first, it was mistaken for earthquakes. The hives trembled, the spires swayed, and dust rained down from the ceilings of ancient manufactorums. But soon, the ground itself began to move, buckling like something alive. Roads split open, the foundations of cathedrals groaned, and beneath it all came the unmistakable rhythm of machinery awakening. Citizens ran to the streets as the earth convulsed, praying to the Emperor, their cries drowned by the thunder of breaking stone. The first to fall was Hive Tenebris, its lower levels swallowed whole as vast chasms opened beneath it, green lights spilling out like fire from the underworld. What emerged from those depths was not magma, not gas, but metal. Cold, perfect, ancient metal dye. As the dust settled, the truth became clear. The city had not fallen, it had been replaced. From beneath the ruins rose geometric towers of black stone and shimmering green, their surfaces shifting like liquid glass. Each spire moved with deliberate precision, sliding upward in silence, displacing everything above it. Hab blocks, shrines, vehicles, all were crushed, absorbed, or erased. Those who watched from the upper platforms saw the impossible. Entire city blocks descending as alien monoliths ascended to take their place. It was not chaos. It was order, cold, precise, mechanical order. The tombs were rising, and the living world was being carved away to make room for the dead dot in the aftermath. The survivors gathered near the outskirts, watching the skyline change. The towers reached toward the storm clouds, connecting through beams of emerald energy that arced between them like veins. Vox networks filled with binary static and whispers in a language no human could speak. The Mechanicus tried to intervene, their machines fried by proximity, their data corrupted beyond recovery. Skittery legions deployed to contain the phenomenon were simply absorbed, their metallic limbs fusing into the rising structures as if welcomed home. The Inquisition declared exterminatus protocols, but their ships never fired, their systems failed, their crews silenced, their orbiting forms drifting powerless above a world being rewritten. The planet's very crust pulsed like a living thing, reshaping itself into a lattice of alien design. Those who remained in the ruins saw the dead world reborn. Streets became corridors of black alloy. The air grew colder, heavy with ozone and decay. Every hour, a new monolith surfaced, each marked with symbols that burned to look upon. From their bases poured mechanical figures, the same silent legions that once walked among the stars before humanity had fire. Their arrival was not sudden. It was ceremonial. A resurrection. The tombs had waited beneath human cities for millennia, slumbering under layers of dust and faith, dreaming of conquest. Now, one by one, they opened their gates. The Necrons walked again. The planet's last broadcast came from a news speaker in the upper hive. His voice shook as he described the view from his window, how the sky had turned green, how the city's heart had become a labyrinth of light and metal, how the sound of chanting echoed from below. "The ground is breathing," he whispered, just before the feed dissolved into static. In orbit, Imperial augurs recorded the planet's surface changing shape, continents realigning, oceans draining into geometric trenches, the surface glowing like circuitry. The tomb world had awoken fully now. The Imperium had called it a planet. The Necrons called it home. It began with static, the kind that hums at the edge of hearing, a faint whisper in the vox like someone breathing through the wires. At first, the Imperial Navy dismissed it as interference from the storms below. Atmospheric discharge, electromagnetic distortion. But when the static deepened into silence, true silence, something inside every officer's gut went cold. Vox relays on the outer moons went dark first, their signals vanishing mid-transmission. Then, the orbital stations, blinking off one by one, like candles snuffed out by an unseen hand. From the command deck of the system's flagship, the planet below was still visible, a vast ocean of stormlight and ruin. But the stars beyond were gone. One by one, the auger screens turned to black. Not noise, not error, black. A void so complete it swallowed all readings, as though the stars themselves had been erased. Long-range sensors failed to respond. The astropaths screamed in unison, blood running from their eyes as they clutched their temples, muttering the same phrase again and again. They have returned to the void. They are not dead. They were waiting. The Fleetmaster ordered a full system scan, desperate to find anything, any trace of contact. But the Auspex returned only one signal, faint, rhythmic, mechanical, a pulse that came from every direction at once. It was not an SOS, it was a countdown. On the surface, the storm grew stronger. Lightning fell not at random, but in patterns, deliberate, repeating sigils that mirrored the pulse detected in orbit. Vox links between planetary command and orbiting ships went silent. No distress calls, no acknowledgements, nothing. The orbital mirrors that once reflected sunlight to the surface began to flicker, then died, plunging entire continents into darkness. Cities that had once glowed like embers in the void now disappeared beneath the storm, their lights extinguished forever. From space, the planet looked like an eye closing. Around it, the rest of the sector began to follow. One world at a time. One star at a time. All going dark. A lone inquisitorial vessel, the Judicium Obscura, reported the final transmission before vanishing into the silence. Contact lost with Segmentum relay. No response from Terra. Astronomican signal unstable. Entire sectors gone dark. Moments later, their image feed flickered, a silhouette of something massive moving behind the ship. For a brief instant, the green glow illuminated its surface, smooth, angular, and endless. Then the feed died. No wreckage was ever recovered. The void claimed everything. Only the pulse remained, now faster, now closer, echoing in the instruments of every remaining vessel. Some claimed to hear whispers in it, voices speaking in ancient tongues, words that no human throat could form. And then even the pulse stopped. Total silence, not the quiet of death, but the stillness of completion. From the dead system, the green lightning reached upward, piercing the void, linking to other worlds like veins of light across black space. Each new connection snuffed out another star. The Imperium's endless night grew darker still, as the ancient machines expanded their dominion. No distress signal escaped. No light returned. Across the stars, billions stared into a sky that no longer answered back. Only the whisper of dead circuitry, and the faint green shimmer of gods reclaiming their lost realm. Humanity did not realize it yet, but entire sectors of the Imperium had already been erased. Not conquered, not destroyed, simply deleted. At first, it was only the light. A faint green shimmer at the edge of the storm clouds, strange, but not unheard of. The planet's atmosphere had always been unstable, scarred by centuries of industry and neglect. The people told themselves it was aurora or radiation storms, or some trick of the sun through the haze. But the shimmer did not fade. It grew brighter, pulsing in rhythm with the vibrations beneath the ground. The nights became luminous, every shadow painted in sickly green. And then came the thunder. Not the sound of clouds colliding, but of something else. Mechanical, deliberate, structured. The lightning split the heavens in vertical lines, illuminating vast shapes that hung in the clouds. They were not aircraft nor any Imperial vessel. They were silent, angular, and impossibly still, outlined only for seconds at a time before the darkness swallowed them again. The first reports came from the hive. TOP's Vox officers describing floating pyramids moving within the storm. The Mechanicus dismissed it as hallucination, atmospheric interference, the human mind imposing order where there was none. But when the clouds parted for a brief instant, orbiting augurs captured the truth. Titanic metallic structures suspended in the sky, their surfaces covered in the same living glyphs as those found underground. They emitted no energy signature detectable by Imperial instruments, yet they pulsed with power strong enough to black out entire cities. Lightning arced between them, forming bridges of emerald light across the heavens. Each pulse was synchronized with the tremors below. The tomb world was not merely rising from the ground, it was unfolding upward into the sky. Then the storm changed color. The green grew darker, richer, until it consumed the daylight entirely. The sun became a pale wound behind the clouds. From within that light, faint shapes began to move, not ships, not storms, but something alive. Silhouettes of colossal, mechanical beings drifted through the green haze, their outlines too vast to comprehend. They moved slowly, majestically, as if awakening from endless sleep. Every flash of lightning revealed more. Countless figures, hanging weightless in the sky, motionless yet watchful. Vox signals filled with whispers, distorted voices, deep and metallic, speaking in unison. Those who listened too long began to bleed from their ears and eyes, their minds overloaded by something ancient and incomprehensible. "The sky is watching," they said, before collapsing into silence. On the surface, panic turned to despair. Pilgrims filled the streets, clutching relics and icons that melted in their hands. The Inquisition attempted to establish contact with the orbiting fleet. No response. The ships were still there, drifting, their lights extinguished. One by one, they fell into the atmosphere, burning silently as green lightning wrapped around them. The ground quaked as their remains struck the rising tombs, sparks cascading into the darkness. Entire cities now lived under perpetual storm, their spires clawing at a sky that no longer belonged to them. Children pointed upward, asking what the shapes were, but even the priests had no words left. And then, the light changed once more. From the clouds above, a single beam of emerald fire pierced the storm, striking the heart of the planet. The air rippled like heat on metal, and every sound ceased. The lightning froze mid-flash. The rain stopped mid-fall. For one impossible moment, the world held its breath. Then, the sky screamed. The clouds split apart, revealing an ocean of machinery stretching into the void, vast starships of black metal, rising from the storm like gods returning to their throne. Their surfaces gleamed with ancient runes, their weapons glowing with deathly light. The green lightning danced around them like chains, binding heaven and earth in perfect symmetry. The Necrons were not invading. They were reclaiming. And in their emerald radiance, humanity's cities, faith, and hope were erased, leaving only silence and the endless hum of a sky now owned by the dead. The last signal came from a Vox station buried deep beneath the ruins of Hive Uranus. Everything above had already fallen, the sky burned green, the cities turned to glass, and the air itself hummed with alien power. But somewhere below the mountains of ash and steel, a single transmitter still lived. Its operator was a dying man, one eye gone, his Vox gear fused to his skull by fire. Around him lay the bodies of his crew, their flesh blackened, their faces frozen in expressions of terror and awe. The storm outside shook the ground, each tremor making the ceiling rain dust upon the consoles. He knew no one would hear him. The sector was dead. The stars were gone. Still, he spoke. Because silence meant surrender, and surrender was heresy. His voice crackled through the dying machine. This is Vox Operator Karas of Hive Orinus. Anyone receiving, static. Then again, the storms have. They're everywhere now. Orbital contact lost. Emperor, preserve us. They're coming through the light. His words broke into distortion, warped by something beyond natural interference. The sound itself seemed alive, vibrating, growing deeper, mechanical, almost mimicking him. The man froze as the static began to echo his last words in perfect repetition. They're coming through the light. His voice, but not his, slower, colder, layered with something that wasn't human. He turned toward the Vox array, watching as the green glow spread across the controls. The machine was no longer malfunctioning, it was responding. Lights pulsed in rhythm with a heartbeat that wasn't his own. From the receiver, a whisper began to form. At first, it was faint, just fragments, shapes of words buried in static. Then, through the hiss and hum, a voice emerged. It was ancient and calm, speaking in tones that carried the weight of eternity. It did not shout. It did not threaten. It simply stated, they were never gone. The operator's breath caught. His body went rigid. The lights flickered once, twice, then turned the color of emerald fire. Above the ruins, the storms quieted. The thunder ceased. For the first time in weeks, silence blanketed the world. Across the void, every remaining Vox beacon, even those thought long destroyed, flickered back to life. The same transmission echoed through them all. The same words. No deviation. No distortion. Every channel, every frequency, from planetary relays to deep void arrays, repeated the same whisper. They were never gone. The voice carried across dead sectors, through ghost ships, over lifeless planets. Even the dormant black ships of the Inquisition recorded it. Though their instruments showed no power source, no transmission point, no origin at all. When Imperial recovery forces arrived months later, they found nothing. No signs of life, no cities, no orbiting vessels, only a world of dust and silent, glassy plains. The Vox towers still stood, perfectly preserved, still transmitting. Even without power, their systems hummed with faint static. The message continued, looping endlessly in every language of mankind. They were never gone. The tech priests who examined the recordings found something buried deep within the waveform, a secondary voice, layered beneath the first. When amplified, it formed not words, but a pattern, a pulse, a signature, one that matched the tomb worlds of the Necron stat. And so the Imperium marked the entire sector as lost to silence. The stars around it remained black, unreachable, unlit. No ship that entered ever returned. The Mechanicus sealed the records. The Inquisition purged the data. But still, across the galaxy, there are whispers, faint echoes caught in ancient Vox channels, traveling between systems at the edge of known space. Always the same phrase. Always the same voice. They were never gone. And every time it speaks, somewhere in the dark, another green light flickers to life.